Alright, hello. Welcome to Yesterlore. I am Grimm's Lawyer, and this is kind of like a season finale to our adventures on Yesterlore so far. Of course, we haven't been doing the seasons in that kind of way, but this is sort of a culmination of a lot of stuff we've been doing so far. And I'm also noticing that I'm having some technical difficulties with OBS right now. There's a few things going poorly, so I'm going to try to figure those out. I was going to try to figure them out before I joined the stream, but I also realized that I was running out of time, and I hope you all don't mind if I'm fixing those on stream. Just because I also enjoy chatting with people in the chat, so it will also give some people some time to come in and see that I'm on, because I did start like 2 minutes after my normal start time, which is actually early compared to some other times that I've come on. I need to get a little bit better at coming on at the right time. I also just realized my computer is not plugged in, so I need to do that as well. We don't want to end the stream tragically with my computer losing battery, so I'm going to plug that in. And while I get this stuff set up, I'm going to give some updates. So I said in the last stream that I would be doing an extra stream this past weekend, talking about sort of the future of Yesterlore, some of the stuff that I have planned moving forward. That was not able to happen, unfortunately. I had it all planned out, when I was going to do it, how it was going to happen, and then some unforeseen stuff came up, and I was not able to do it, and I was going to try to throw something in sometime during the week, but it just did not work out, and ultimately I just realized that I should probably just explain it in the normal Yesterlore stream. We will have time probably to do a little bit of that today. I don't plan on finishing our rune comparison today. I'm expecting it's going to take 2 sessions, so we'll start the rune comparison today, and then we will resume the rune comparison next week. I'm still just trying to align stuff a little bit here. That's the sort of last thing I need to fix in terms of preparing for the stream. We don't need to see those numbers, that's fine. What matters is the content of the rune poems, because that's what we're going to be looking at today. No. Stop. As I've said many a time, OBS screen economy is an art. So, I'm getting this figured out. I will explain a little bit what the plan is for how we're going to go about this comparison. Getting it to fit is becoming a little bit of a challenge. I think what might help is if I maybe make myself in the fireplace a bit smaller. A little smaller Grimm's Lair over here. And then I will have more space to make this bigger. Oh, Toki Ankala. Hello. So, I'm just getting some last minute things fixed in terms of the stream, because I was having some technical difficulties today. We are going to start our comparison of the 3 rune poems that we read, and I will explain now how this is going to work. After we get to our cutoff point for today, we're not going to finish all 17 poems today. When we get to that cutoff, I'm going to stop a bit so I can discuss sort of plans for the future, like I had hoped to do this past weekend and had to cancel. We're going to do that at the end of today. So here's how the comparison is going to work. What we're going to do, and I really would love audience participation on this, is I'm going to read each rune poem across, like in the rows. So I'm going to start with the Old English rune poem, and then I'm going to talk about what it meant, sort of jog our memories for what it said, and then I will do the same for the Old Norwegian rune poem, and then the same for the Old Icelandic rune poem. And it's at that point, once I've done all three, well, actually, you can start pointing things out even when I read the Old Norwegian one, and I will just read your comments after I've read all three. We will be pointing out things that are either similar between the three. They can be similar phrasings, similar wordings. They could even be differences, like stark differences. If you notice something about like the tone being similar or different, that is also welcome. Any kind of observations you have about the three rune poems, and actually just like any observations you have, that is what we're going to be looking for. And I'll be using sort of highlight tools to highlight some words, if we see words that sort of resonate across. What I expect to find, and I think I've pointed this out before, but what I expect to find is that the Old Norwegian and Old Icelandic rune poems are going to have a lot more direct, like wording parallels, because they're in a sort of similar tradition. They're both mapping to the younger Futhark that we see here in this column that's before these two. So there is going to be a lot more similar phrasing. But I have already pointed out in prior streams some of the connections that do exist between the Old English rune poem and either or both of the Old Norwegian and Old Icelandic ones. So we're just going to be looking for as many similarities or stark differences as we can. So we're going to go ahead and do that. All right. So the first poem in Old English is Feoch. Feoch bithfrovor fira jehulchum. Shalthach manna jehulch michlun hit dalan. Jefhewilla fordrichne domes leotan. So this was Feoch, which is where the word fee comes from, and it originally meant cattle, like all it does in all three, but comes to mean wealth or goods in these old Germanic languages. So wealth is frovor, wealth is comfort, fira iohilchum, to every person, to everyone. Shalthach manna yehulch, though everyone must michlun hit dalan, deal it out generously. If he would, before the Lord or his Lord, receive good judgment or cast lots of judgment. We talked about sort of the two possible interpretations there. So wealth is good, but you got to share it if you want to be judged well or have good standing. That's sort of the gist of the Old English rune poem for Feoch. Then we get Fe in Old Norwegian. Fe walder franda roge, födesk ulver I skogi. Wealth becomes strife amongst loved ones. The wolf feeds itself in the forest. So we have very different vibe here. Wealth is causing strife, and it's being sort of contrasted or compared with a wolf feeding itself. I think contrasted. We have a very similar thing going on in Old Icelandic. We have Fe franda rog och flöider uiti och grafseits gata aurum fylker. And in the Old Icelandic, there's always like a Latin word plus a word for king at the end. So it's just gold king. So we have, once again, pretty identical wording here. Wealth is strife among loved ones, and is a harbinger of flooding, and is the sort of pathway of the grave snake, which was the grave fish, which was a kenning for a snake. So both the Old Norwegian and Old Icelandic rune poems have a much more sort of negative take on wealth than the Old English one, which is like, it's good, but you gotta share it. It's almost like the Norwegian and Icelandic rune poems are sort of like, this is what happens when you don't share it. It's a cause of strife. So I'm going to go ahead and do some highlighting of some of the, especially this wording of the genitive plural of loved one, frænda, and then rog, or here it's rogi in the dative because it's coming after walder here. So this is, wealth becomes a source of strife for loved ones, and then this is just wealth is strife for loved ones. So that's sort of the difference between the Icelandic and the, I'm looking for highlight. Oh, that's right, you can't highlight specific text in Google Sheets. So I'm just going to italicize and bold it, I guess. I guess I could color it differently, but maybe I'll just underline it actually. That might fare a bit better with some of these special characters as well. I fear bolding is going to mess with the size of the columns as well, so I'm not going to mess with that either, I think. Yeah, so we have like just a parallel phrase, strife among loved ones for wealth. Are there any other sort of similarities or differences people were noticing or wanted to point out before we move on to the next one? If not, we can go ahead and go to the next one. Feel free to keep mentioning prior ones if you sort of didn't get a chance. So we're going to go ahead and go to this one, which in Old English is called ur. So ur bith anmod, and overhyrned, fella frekna, deor feuchtich mid hornum, mare morstapa, thatis modi wucht. So, ur was the word for an aurochs, which is sort of the wild animal from which cattle is domesticated. So it's like a wild bovine. And it's anmod, it's proud, and horned above or overly horned. In both senses make sense. They had big horns. Aurochs have big horns. Very severe. Fella frekna. Very severe. Deor feuchteth. The beast. This is where we get the word deer from, but in Old English it just means any creature, any animal. Deor feuchteth. The beast fights with horns, mid hornum. Mara morstapa. The famous moor-stepper. The famous goer through the wastes. That is modi wuch. That is a proud creature. Okay, so this is all about the majestic but fearsome aurochs. We get some very different things in both the Norwegian and the Icelandic rune poems. We get in Norwegian, ur af illu jarne, opt løper rein og hjarne. So here we get ur, which is in Old Norwegian, it's referencing dross, which is sort of the waste product of metalwork. So dross is from bad iron. So if your iron is bad, there's going to be a lot of sort of waste product from it when you clean it. Often leaps the reindeer upon, and then hjarni was upon the sort of snow crust. It's sort of snow that melts and then freezes again. So it's more crunchy, and the snow below it might break or might sort of melt, and then if you step on it, like it looks safe to step on, but then you step on it and then it's gonna be a bad time. You're gonna get all wet. So very different. So it's bad metal, leaving waste. We do get a creature in this one, a different kind of mammal, a ruminant mammal. We get a reindeer jumping on the cold ice instead of the aurochs walking through the wastes. and being kind of awesome. In the Icelandic one, we get yet a different meaning. It is related to dross etymologically. Oh, thank God there is a creature. Yeah, what would we do if there were no creature here? We get ur related etymologically to this ur, sort of the metal leavings. But in Old Icelandic, it means like a shower, like rain coming down. So, which would make sense because we've got ur skya grátar. It is the clouds. Skya here is related to the word sky. In English, it's where we get sky from, but it means clouds here. Of clouds, grátar, it's the sort of lament of clouds, the crying out of clouds. Very, very common sort of metaphor in English to do is comparing rain to like clouds crying. That's a pretty common thing poetically, and it's not new. Och skara thverir och hirðis hatur umbre visi. So we've got it is the skara thverir. It is the skara is the sort of the harvest, the shearing, the cutting of your crops. It is the thverir. It is the sort of ruination of it. It's the destruction of the harvest. So you don't want it to rain too much where your crops are going to fail. That's more of a problem in sort of this very northern climate. Too much rain is more of the issue in medieval Iceland. Och hirðis hatur, and the hate, the enemy of the shepherd, the herdsman, or whatever you want, however you want to translate it. It's related to herder. It's the enemy of the shepherd. Again, bad for agriculture. Too much rain, bad for agriculture. And then we get the Latin word for shadows. Shadows, king. Another word for king at the end, like in all the Icelandic words. So, any similarities or differences between these? I guess the thing I would point out here is, once again, the Icelandic and Norwegian ones are kind of more negative. The Old English one does mention that the ox is dangerous, like it has horns, it fights with its horns, it's very fierce. But it also talks about how it's proud. It's a proud beast. Here, the reindeer is unfortunately falling into very cold water, and it's sort of a negative comparison. And here we get rain being too much for your crops. So, a more of a negative bent here, again, with the Norwegian and Icelandic ones than in the Old English ones. The Old English one is a little bit more neutral. Let's move on to the next one. So we've got thorn here. Might find it funny that thorn here is spelled with an eth. Oh no, the creature. Yeah, the poor reindeer. I think having hooves probably helps instead of having like very fleshy feet that go into sort of snow melt. I think hooves would help a little bit with not getting frostbite, but I don't know. So yeah, thorn bith tharla sharp, feina jehulshum, anfeng is evil, unyemetum reda, manna jehulshun, thehem mid rasteth. So thorn is very sharp. Thorn is very sharp. Yeah, that's true. To anyone, grabbing it, seizing, is bad. Grabbing it is bad. You don't want to grab thorns. Immeasurably severe. Yeah, especially in a time period where you didn't have the most reliable ways to disinfect a cut. Definitely getting pricked by a thorn was very dangerous. To anyone, to anyone who dwells or rests among them or with them. So if you're hanging out in thorns, that's going to be a bad idea. Basically, be careful of thorns is the gist of this Old English one. In the Old Norwegian one, we get Thurs warder quenna quellu, Kater warder far of illu. So we get the Thurs, which is a jotun, or an eoten in Old English, and etten, a agent of destruction and chaos. Often translated as giant, but do not be mistaken, they don't have to be huge. It's just a different class of being, kind of. More like not exactly a troll, but that type of creature. So, Thurs becomes, again, quillu quenna. I'm reordering that on purpose. The Thurs becomes the torment of women. And then we get Kater warder far of illu. So, few become... Kater is like happy, if I'm not mistaken. It has positive connotations. That's what I remember of Kater. But few become positive from evil. Not too much of a different vibe from the thorn one. Obviously, it's not talking about thorns. It's talking about ettins. But both are dangerous. Be careful. Few good things come of evil. Few good things come from hanging out in a bed of thorns. The Icelandic one, we see some very close sort of verbiage to the Old Norwegian. Again, we have Thurs quenna quol, okletta bui, och ward runar ver, Saturnus Thengil. Sorry, I did a modern Icelandic there. Thengil. Thurs quenna quol. So, once again, the giant is... Are those the same creatures sometimes misleadingly called giants from Old English folklore? Yes. Ettins in modern English, Eotenas in Old English, Jotnar in Old Norse. Yeah, it is. Or is it just... No, they're pretty much treated as synonyms. In Old English, this word Thurs, there is a cognate in Old English, it's Thirs with a Y, but otherwise spelled the same, instead of a U. But it seems to just be a synonym for Etten or Jotun. Misleadingly called giants, yeah. So yeah, Thurs quenna quol. Once again, it's similar wording. Quol is related to quillu. It's like a different noun with a similar meaning of sort of torture. So Thurs is torture for women, and kletta bui, a dweller of cliffs, ok wardrunar ver, and the husband. We talked about how it means husband in Icelandic. Well, it means sort of just man in Old English. Ver, the husband of, and then wardrun was the word for a giant. Wardrun. Rune is cognate to the word rune, I believe. I don't see a reason why it wouldn't be. It gets used of runes, and it comes from a word that probably just means whisper originally, or secret. But it also gets used, especially in the feminine, to refer to feminine sort of supernatural associated anything really. Helleruna is a word for witch in Old English, and it just means like rune of hell. So it's runa can mean just a female magical being. In Old Norse, often it's like a female giant. There is also, I believe, I think this is where they got their name from. There's a band called Wardruna, spelled with a W and a D here. But I believe it is from this word, Wardruna. They are sort of like a metal, but also not all metal. They have like folk metal vibes. They have different songs with different sort of vibes to them, but they all are kind of going for like a northern European aesthetic, like a dark Northern European aesthetic is what I associate with this band, and I think they did get that name from this word here, Warthrun, the giantess. So the Thurs is the husband of the female version of Thurs, basically. Just looking for an alliteration here. And then Saturnus, Saturn, king. And we talked last week about, or not last week, 2 weeks ago when we did this one, about how they're probably just picking a titan from the Roman pantheon to equate with Thurs here. Okay, let's go to the next one. Unless there's other connections people want to point out. The main one here that I pointed out was just the wording here of Quennaquilu and Quennaqual. They're just very similar, seem to be formulated in much the way that like Frandarog was in the Fey ones. But there was also a sort of similarity in terms of the tone with the Old English one as well. They're all kind of like warnings almost. Like this is a warning about thorns, and this is a warning about giants. I have seen suggestion that maybe even like this was originally Thurs in Old English and they Christianized it by making it not about Thurs. I don't think necessarily that's true, but it is something that people have put together. I think you'd have to rewrite the entire stanza or a good amount of the stanza to make it work for Thurs. Is the Saturn reference a kind of syncretism or just a parallel reference? I don't think it's syncretism because at the point of time when this was written, at least, most people don't think that these Latin tags were necessarily original. Like, if this was an oral poem before, which it probably was, and it went back to sort of pagan times, heathen times, most critics that I'm aware of don't think that these Latin bits would have been included, and that they were instead included by the learned in Latin scribes who are writing the copy from which this was copied. So, probably not syncretism because it was Christians writing this. We've talked about this before, I think. The sort of tendency by some medieval Christians to just sort of lump any kind of pagan thing together. This happens in Beowulf, when sort of like Ettins and elves and zombies are all kind of put in the same category. This is a thing that happens a lot, where like things that maybe in heathen times would have been like, there would have been like more positive associated beings and more negative associated ones, they all just get lumped together by Christians. So here we have a very negative association of a sort of pagan concept of a Thurs, and then Saturnus, which in the Roman pantheon, it's a little different from the Greek, where Kronos is like a titan and he eats his children. Saturnus does not have necessarily all the same associations, and he's associated with like agriculture. But to the Christian writing this, it's like it's pagan. So let's just throw it in. That's sort of my read of why they included Saturnus here. I can't see another reason to include Saturnus, like why Saturnus and not someone else. I think it's just kind of random. There might be a reason though. They were just talking about agriculture in the last stanza in the Icelandic rune poem, so maybe this is sort of harkening back to that. I'm not sure. If there aren't any other questions about this one, we can move on to the next poem, though. I'm going to read Os here. Os bydd ordfruma alsra spracha. Sorry, there we go. Wisdom is vrado and witna frovor, and erla jahwam erdnes tohicht. Erdnes antohicht. There we go. I don't know why I was having such a problem with that. So, Os here, we talked about how it has two possible readings. One is that it's a borrowing from Latin, the Latin word os meaning mouth, whence the word oral, etc. So it could mean mouth, and that would make sense for the stanza. Or it could mean the sort of rare in writing but common in names word for god that usually specifically references the god Woden, like in the name Oswald or Oscar or Oswin. All of those have that os prefix that, or not prefix, but os element that probably refers to Woden, because in Old Norse that same prefix usually refers to Odin, and we get in the Icelandic one a direct reference to Odin in their version of this poem, and Odin is associated with a lot of the things that are mentioned in the poem, so it could kind of go either way. So I'm going to translate it just os for now, and I'll read the rest. So os is the sort of source or the fount of speech, or it is the originator of every speech. It is wisdom support and the comfort to the wise, and to everyone a hope, and tohicht is hope, and adness is sort of easiness, joy, and hope. Positive things. So the mouth is the origin of all speech, support of wisdom, comfort to the wise, and to everyone hope and gladness. That would all make sense. But also, the god Woden is the origin of speech. He gave people the runes, so that would be the origin of speech. And he is associated with wisdom, so he is wisdom and support, and a comfort to the wise. He is associated with wisdom, like I said. And to everyone, joy and hope. Both could work, and we get a parallel kind of to both in the Norwegian and the Old Icelandic. So I'll go ahead and read those. So the Norwegian one says, Os flastra farda for, en skalper swarda. So, Os here means estuary. This is not the same word as the name of the god. It is, however, it would be cognate to the Latin word from which it is borrowed, because mouth gets borrowed into Old English here, if that's what's happening. It just generally gets borrowed into Germanic as a word for mouth, and in Norwegian it comes to mean like a mouth of a river, so an estuary in this Old Norwegian. So an estuary is the most sort of traveled way that you go, the most, or sort of the best, most frequent way of travel. If you're going to sail out from Norway, what most people did was go out of an estuary and sail elsewhere. So that would make sense. And then it says, en skalpur swerda. And as is the sheath for the sword. So an estuary is the most frequent path for travel. A sheath is the most frequent path for a sword. So if the Old English one means mouth, then this would sort of be a parallel, would sort of have a similar meaning here to mouth from the same Latin word. Not much else in common. The Old Icelandic one goes the other way. It is a reference. It's os here, and it means God. But which God? Os algin gautur ok. Sorry, my dog is barking. Okay, got it taken care of. Okay, os algin gautur ok Osgars Javur ok Valhallarvisi Jupiter Odwiti. So, the god is Old Gautur. Dog cameo, yeah. He's not in here, but he was barking at something out there. So, Algen Gautur, Old Gautur. Gautur is a name of Odin in Old Norse. That's another one of his names. There's a Gothic attestation of a Gothic god named Gauts, which is Gauts, which may be the same person here. Ok Osgards Jor, and the chieftain of Osgard, of what we tend to pronounce Asgard in modern English, Osgard, the realm of the gods. So again, pretty unambiguously Odin here. Ok Valhallar Visi, and the sort of ruler or king of Valhall, of the Hall of the Slain. And then he gets compared to Jupiter here. And we were kind of pointing out when we did this originally how strange that was, because usually he is associated with not Jupiter. But the association seems to be here, king of the gods. So Jupiter in the Roman pantheon, and here at this point in time in Iceland, when this, like, sort of the last pagans in Iceland, at least, because when this was written, it was Christians writing it. But at the late point in time when people were settling Iceland, at least in the courts, Odin was seen as the ruler of the gods. So that would make sense here. So the parallels here are kind of conditional. There don't seem to be any strong parallels between the Old Icelandic and the Old Norwegian one, because they're just completely different words that they're talking about. But either one of them could be related to the Old English one. I've also seen a suggestion, and I think it was Drekisdóttir that I saw this from. It might have been someone else, but I think it was her, that it's supposed to be double entendre in the Old English one, that the person composing it knew of the Latin word and also was referencing Woden, and they were sort of being cheeky. It could be both. So it could be that all three of these are sort of related in that way. But other than that, I don't see any really strong parallels. I don't know if anyone else is noticing parallels between the three, given how I translated them. But if that's all, then I'm going to go ahead and go to the next one. And if you still have observations about these, please let me know, and I can circle back. So here we get one that is, this is the first one since Feoch and Fe, where the name is the same in all three for a while. So we've got Rad biton rechide rincha johulrum, Sefta on Sweethwat, Thamthe sitteth on Uvan, Mara mayen herdum oven milpathas. Okay, I got a comment. So Youngkala says, could it be an indicator that the Norwegian one is more recent, or are they all roughly from the same time period? So the Old English one is probably, I wonder if it started out with the word referring to Odin. The Latin loan word ended up confusing it. I think there's a couple things going on here. You're not entirely off base. I think what you're saying makes sense. So what happened was, I'll give like rough datings for at least the manuscripts of these. So the Old English seems to be a late West Saxon dialect that this is written in, preserving an older non-West Saxon dialect, as is common in Old English literature. So the composition originally of like the oral poem probably goes really far back to like maybe even pagan times, but the composition of this poem, or at least this version of it, seems to be Christian, and also the copy is definitely late, like 11th century maybe. The Old Norwegian one seems to be 13th century, so like 1200s. It's definitely during a Christian time period in Norway, but again, it could have orally been older. The Icelandic one is a little later, probably the 1300s, at least the manuscript is. So, and then the copies that we have of the Norwegian one are later, so there could be tempering in terms of when they copied it down. It might have been more sort of pagan in the beginning. But the other thing going on here is there's a sound change that is confusing these poems a bit. The name of the rune that people have reconstructed from which this comes is just the name of the word for God, which is Ansus in Proto-Germanic, Ansus. Now, there's sort of a spiritization and lengthening and vowel shift that happens in Old English that makes that become os, and it also makes it become os in Old Icelandic. Now, in Old Icelandic, that kind of rounds out and becomes, I guess this would be pronounced aus in modern Icelandic, aus. But, and in normalized Old Icelandic that we usually even spell it that way, this isn't the typical spelling, this is sort of more etymological. But because of that sound change that happened, this rune represents the sound o, like a long o, usually one that comes from an older a that has gone through some kind of sound change. So because of that sound change, which kind of makes the meaning a little bit incongruent with the rune itself, I think this is just a replacement where it's os, because this is the sound that it makes now. This is the sound that this rune makes, so we're going to pick a word that sounds kind of like the original word, but that makes the sound. So the Norwegian copy that we can reconstruct seems to be a little bit older than the Icelandic copy that we have, but the Icelandic copy might be preserving an older one, as may the Norwegian. So we're really not sure which one is earlier. The oldest one that we can tell is the Old English one. So the Old English one is the earliest, and it is just as ambiguous as the differences between these two. So it's super hard to tell what the original meaning was. Intuition makes a lot of people think it probably wasn't the Latin one, just because they're Germanic letters. The name probably was originally Germanic and not the Germanic alone from Latin. But also the whole concept of writing seemed to move from Southern Europe to Northern Europe. So Latin influence isn't impossible, at least in the naming of these things. So it's just very uncertain there. So I read rad. I'm going to go ahead and translate it. So riding, rad, is where we get the word road from, but as I've explained a couple times, it doesn't mean road in Old English, it means riding. Riding is in a building, or riding, or like a journey. A journey is in a building to everyone soft and intense, very intense, to the one who sits upon a horse. Mar is horse. A horse, a very strong horse, over mil pathas, sort of measured roads. Mile paths is what that sort of literally calcs into modern English. It's mil, mile, which is Latin loan, I believe, and then path is path, so mile paths. Measured roads. Journeys are easy if you're indoors, because you're not really journeying, and they're intense if you're going on a horse over the ways, doing your thing. So that is the Old English one, and we see some parallels actually with both the Icelandic and Norwegian ones, although they each use a different word for horse, of which there is a cognate in Old English of both, but none of these are using the cognate words for horse. They're all choosing a different word that means horse. So we're going to look at that. So we've got Ræð kvæða rossum wetsta, regin slå swardet betsta. So the riding, they say, is joy, or it's like the most, oh wait, no, I'm thinking of the wrong thing. I was going to say, riding is a joy over here. Riding is the worst, they say, hrossum. There's a tendency in some Old Norwegian to drop an initial H. This is hross in sort of more standard Old Norse, and it's cognate to horse in Old English, so that means horse. So they say riding is the worst for horses. And then it says Regin, who is a dwarf in a lot of the stories that we get in Old Norse. The dwarf Regin, slow, it sounds like slew, and it's cognate with slew, but it just means he beat or forged the best sword, Swardet Betsta. So they seem to not be the most related to each other, but definitely there's a sort of, it makes sense that they both reference horses because it's talking about riding. So riding is easy inside and difficult, or not so much difficult as like intense outside on a horse. Here we've got riding is the worst for the horse. So Norwegian is asking us to think of it from the horse's perspective. That horse must be tired. But we get a different perspective from all the Icelandic. Reið sitjandi sala och snúði ferð och jors erfiði. So we get both perspectives sort of aligned here. Riding is sala sitjandi. It is great. It's fun for the sitter, the one who's riding, the horseman. Och snooty ferð. And it is a speedy, snoothig. Snoothig exists in Old English too, snoody, I believe. It's snoothig in Old Icelandic. A speedy ferð, a speedy journey. Och jors erfiði. And erfiði is toil or labor. Jors, of the horse. Again, this is cognate to, in Old English, this word jord here for horse. It's a really rare word for horse. Jord. It's cognate with not eo, it's not long, it's short in Old English. Eo. Eoch. Eoch means horse, and it is one of the runes that exists in the Old English rune poem, but it does not have a cognate rune in the younger Futhark, so that we don't get that poem in either Norwegian or Old Icelandic. We don't get a horse poem, so this is the closest to a horse poem we get in the Norwegian and Icelandic ones. And as Big Nasty Trick says, so true, we should always be considering the horses. Yes. So the Old English one is like, riding is fun. Norwegian says riding sucks for horses, and Icelandic says riding is fun for the rider and sucks for the horse. So we get sort of both perspectives aligned there. So I think the main through line with these three, other than having the same name, is that horses get brought up in each, and we are seeing sort of the perspective of the rider versus the horse across. Fucked up, we need more horse poems. Yeah, see, the old Icelandic and Old Norwegian are missing out on that extra poem about horses that the Old English one gets. Kind of a shame. Okay, I think we can do maybe one or two more before we have to stop, because I want time to look at the looking ahead kind of thing I wanted to do today. So I think we can do Cain here. Yeah. So yeah, I'm going to go ahead and do Cain. Cain bith quickere hwam cúth on fyre, blak on bertlich byrneth oftest, thar he adalingas inne restath. So the torch is known to everyone, all the living, as fire, bright and shining and brightly. It burns always, oftest, most often, where they, or not they, where the, where they, the adalingas, the nobles, rest within. So it is a torch. Cain is a torch. Torch is known to everyone as fire. It burns brightly. Most bright where they put it inside. Makes sense for a torch. It all makes sense. And then we do not get a cognate in the Old Norwegian and Old Icelandic. We get kaun. And the cross out here was the emendation that I preferred. A lot of people did a lot of weird things to make it rhyme in the Old Norwegian copies that we have, because we don't have the original manuscript. We just have a bunch of people later copying it, and each one tried a different strategy for making these rhyme. And I didn't like most of them, except for this one that just kind of completely ignores the word bagge, which means to bend. It can make sense because it's kaun means ulcer, or just any kind of fatal wound. And it is for youth, of children, bending, like it causes them to bend over in pain, maybe. But bolwan is more intense. It's fatality. An ulcer is a fatality for children, and I like bolwan because it rhymes with bolwan, and we also have bol here. So I think there might have been a thing where they saw these two words describe and was like, hey, I repeated the same word, I gotta fix that. But no, the repetition is on purpose. That's sort of my read on it. So that's what I went with. But you can read it either way. It still kind of makes the same argument that ulcers are dangerous for children. And then we get bol here, fatality, or death, makes the corpse pale. True. Dying makes you go pale, or just lose your color. In some way, shape, or form. human pigmentation loses some of its brilliance when your blood stops moving. It's kind of a normal thing that happens. So, Kaun barna bol och bardaga far. This is an emendation where this word is typically added in, just because metrically it doesn't work without it really. Och håll fua hos flagella konungar. So we get the ulcer is deadly for children. Again, this is another reason why I think this makes sense, because it parallels it better to have bol in both these first sort of lines of the stanza here. It is death for youth. Och bardaga far. It is a point that is deadly or painful. Og håll fua hos, and the house of death, really. The house of dying, hold fua here. And then flagella konungur. Flagella was the word for lashes, like of a whip. Lashes are king. So we get ulcers being similarly dangerous for youth here, for kids, in both, with pretty similar wording. At least having barna and bol in both, regardless of the emendation, there's barna and bol in both. Death of children, which is depressing. And there's no connection to the Old English that we can really find. There is a theory that exists where the idea is that the word that we see in Old Norwegian and Old Icelandic is the original, that it was kauna in Proto-Germanic. And when you apply sound change to kauna into Old English, you get this word like can, which doesn't seem to exist. Like, we don't have any attest to word can. In some dialects, it would be can instead of can. But what happened, kind of like what we were saying was probably happening in Old Norwegian, where a sound change caused a word to not make sense on its own anymore, and so you needed to kind of pick a word that sounds like sort of like a homophone. That might have been what happened in Old English, where the word can, ulcer, no longer existed. So, like, what the heck is a can? Well, obviously that's can, that's a torch. And that's sort of how that might have happened. That is a theory that exists out there. Okay, we, in theory, have time for Heil and Hagal. I do not want to do this today, though, because I would like to talk a little bit about plans for future streams. We may or may not finish this comparison next time. I think there's a good chance that we will finish it because I don't have any preamble, and hopefully I will have the stream all, like, ready at the very beginning of the stream next time. But I did want to talk a little bit about what's going to happen after next week, or at least after we finish the comparison, which I'm hoping will be next week. I do plan on going a little bit faster next week too. So next week we are going to hopefully finish, and then after that we're done with rune poetry at that point. That doesn't mean we have to be done with rune stuff. If people want rune stuff, they can contact me or write in the comments of the upload. That will take. Lately, I've been pretty good about uploading it within the hour, less than an hour after the stream ends. Those go on YouTube. You can write in the comments there, or you can find a way to contact me in the channel description of both Twitch and YouTube. But after that, we are going to move on to some different stuff. We can do more rune stuff. In fact, I'm looking for more in-between stuff. But this document that you see here is gone. It just closed. I don't know why that happened. I think my Firefox might have crashed, I think is what probably just happened. Apologies. My browser just crashed and closed itself. Okay, let me figure this out. Apologies. Let's see, I was on, oh, there we go. Oh, at least it remembered. It just auto reopened my tabs. It's just going to take a moment for them to load. Okay. close rune comparison to maybe speed up the process a little bit. How's everyone doing in the chat while we wait for this? I'm just working on fixing some of this right now. I do not know why Firefox is having such a problem opening anything. Good, thank you. That is good to hear. I'm glad you're doing good. Sorry this happened. Doing good, no worries. Thank you. Awesome. Anyone read anything interesting lately? Other than rune poems? Yeah, I'm really excited to talk about what we're going to be reading after the rune poems are done. Okay. I'm also, while things are taking forever to load, I'm trying to close some things that are running in the background to hopefully make my computer run a little bit faster. I read/listened to the 9 Herbs hymn. Oh, awesome. That is really awesome. I think I have a link to a cool thing about that, but I need to find it again. I might hit you up later and send that to you. What did you think of the 9 Herbs charm? I'm a big fan of it. For those who don't know, the 9 Herbs charm, oh yeah, that was the word you were looking for, yeah, charm. The 9 Herbs charm is a metrical charm that is present in one of the few sort of collections of charms, like magic spells that exist in the Old English period, and they seem to be what we might call Christo-pagan charms. I'm trying to close a background program, and every time I click End Activity, it opens another of the activity, and I do not know why that is happening. It's like the opposite of what I want. Oh, I just realized that's a big program to be running in the back. I thought I ended that process. There's a lot of processes I thought I ended before the stream, but they appear to have opened themselves up again. And this is why I closed them before the stream. Yeah, so the 9 Herbs charm is a metrical charm. There are metrical charms that exist in Old English literature that seem to be spells, but they are Christian spells. They reference God and other things, but they also do make oblique sort of pagan, heathen references as well, which is why they're useful to learn about heathenry at the same time. And the 9 Herbs charm is a really well-known charm because it is a place where, in Old English, the god Woden is explicitly referenced as having slain a worm. Worm is the Old English word for, could mean snake or dragon. It's used sort of, the concept of snake and dragon being completely separate is not as salient in medieval literature as it is now. We tend to think of dragons and snakes as very different, but they're all sort of under the umbrella of serpent in ancient and medieval literature. And so Worm could mean both things, dragon or serpent. The way I tend to think of it is that Worm is like an umbrella term for serpent, and then there is the lone draka that is more specific to like the type of serpent that we tend to think of as dragon, but Worm can refer to dragon as well. And this is the case in Old Norse as well. Same is true in early Romanic tradition as well. Nagas, yeah, I was actually thinking about that too, which also refers to elephants and big trees, strangely. Yeah, the Indo-Europeans just, in general, had a very vague sense of what a dragon was, or just like serpent. And I'm not surprised that carries through into Brahminic stuff as well. So, anyway, in the 9 Herbs charm, Woden slays a worm with 9 what are called wuldortanas, glory twigs or glory sticks, which are the 9 herbs in question in the charm. So people find it very significant that it is Woden killing a serpent, and also that it is 9, since that number seems to be very important to a lot of Old Norse texts, not so many in Old English. The magic number in Old English stuff tends to be 7, but there do seem to be 9 glory twigs that Woden uses to slay the serpent. Okay, I've got the thing opened now. Sorry, I was still closing background programs. We won't have the flame, I think, because the flame is not loading. It's just loading another smaller version of the thing. Actually, I think I can open the fireplace real quick. Let's see. Okay, why does it look like that, though? That's very strange. Alright. Yeah, very weird. Okay, well, we'll just live with the weird fireplace for a minute. I'm only gonna... This will only take a couple minutes. I just wanted to talk a little bit about the streams that we have planned moving forward. So this is a sheet that has what we've done. And I did want to review that a little bit. We started with Old English riddles. We did some more Old English riddles. Oh, don't tell me you're loading. Okay, thank you. We did more Old English riddles. We read a Old English legal document, the Yereva. We read some Old English letters. Then we kind of took a break from Old English and looked at the stela of xxiii, and that was some ancient Egyptian stuff that we looked at. It was pretty fun. And then we did some ancient Greek riddles for 2 weeks. And then we looked at some Swedish rune stones. And then we started this odyssey of rune poetry. So we did 7 Old English rune poem sessions. We did a Gothic Bible reading in between. We did 2 Old Norwegian rune poems sessions, and then we'd read Runetal, that section of Havamal that talks about Odin getting the runes. And then we did the Old Icelandic rune poem, and here we are today doing the rune poem comparison, hopefully one more. And I talked a little bit about this last week, but I kind of wanted to transition into talking about some stuff that we could read in Middle English. And I thought that would be fun for a couple of reasons. A, because it, actually, I'm going to say 3 reasons. 1, Middle English is easier for modern English readers to understand more of, so it will be, I guess, a little bit less me just translating each and every word for you, and more, hopefully, potential for interaction or like observations before I get to any of sort of the difficult words. 2, it allows us to look at some different genres. I've got to go, but great stream as always. Thank you very much. Yeah, so the second reason is different genres we get to look at in Middle English stuff, and just generally a little bit later chronologically medieval literature. And that brings me to my third reason, which is I'd like to look at later medieval stuff, because most of the stuff we've been looking at least in its origin, has been early medieval. So this Old English rune poem, probably 11th century, but probably composed many centuries before. The Old Norwegian rune poem manuscript, probably 1200s, but again, probably from like Viking age or before. And same with the Old Icelandic one, probably composed Viking age or before. And the Middle English stuff that I want to look at is sort of after this time period, when England, for example, had already undergone the Norman conquest. And we're going to get a lot more influence from Celtic stuff as well, which is fun, because I like Celtic stuff, and we haven't really looked at anything Celtic yet. We're going to still start with Middle English stuff, and I think Sir Orfeo would be a fun poem to start with, because it's not that long, and it gets us into not quite Arthurian literature, but it allows us to segue into that. We're going to read of Arthur and of Merlin, and I also expect that these will take multiple sessions. Then I plan on looking at L'Enval, which is actually a old French poem, so we're going to read some Old French. Not the longest poem ever, but we're going to read at least part of L'Enval. because it is the sort of source for later stories. There are a few different later stories about Sir Launfal, and this is another Arthurian story, but I wanted to look at the Old French one so that we can then compare it to the Middle English one. And it is also, both of these are sort of in a similar genre to what we get here later in The Wedding of Sir Gawain and Raniel, and also Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. Both Middle English poems, both about Sir Gawain, and they are also sort of in this similar courtly tradition. Then I'd like to read a poem called Three Dead Kings, which is not a super long poem, but it is a source that seems to have influenced this next one that we're going to read, which is the Winters of Arthur at the Tern Wathelin, which is another Arthurian story. And I think I have more Arthurian stuff planned for after this. But we also, I would like for us to not just do these all in a row. I expect many of these to take multiple sessions, a la rune poems, like more a la Old English rune poem where there were quite a few sessions. So I would like to break these up with other stuff in between, other sort of little detours like we did with the Egyptian stuff and the Greek stuff. I would like more stuff. So if you have suggestions for things you would like to see, maybe we could read the Nine Herbs Charm. I think that would be fun to do. Or other Old English charms. I think that could be fun. Other spells would be cool to look at. But yeah, definitely contact me if you have ideas for things you would like to see on yesterlore, and don't be afraid of whether or not it's something I can read, because like I've said in the past, I also want to collect things that maybe we can't do on yesterlore, but I want to do a stream where I point people in the direction of places where they can see that kind of content, if it exists. So that is all for today. Sorry for going over a bit because of technical stuff, but I had a lot of fun today, and hopefully next week we will finish the rune poem comparison. Thank you for everyone who participated today, and anyone in the future participating in the comments or in their brains as they watch/listen to this stream. I hope you all have a good rest of your time zone. Thank you, and farewell. Or maybe not farewell yet. I'm still having technical difficulties. Okay, have a good time zone.